Welcome back, guys. We're here again, checking out another video.
It's not that I don't think
Welcome
Rayman
back,
2 is
guys.
great.
We're here
Maybe
again,
this is one of
checking out
those you
another
had to be there
video.
moments, but visually, this was one of the most groundbreaking things to come out of the 3D
back,
revolution
guys.
brought
We're
about
here
by
again.
Mario 64, saying, hey, why don't we paint those textures?
Sorry
Why don't
about
we
that.
conceptualize some of those amazing...
I think had a bit of an echo. Let's go back and rewatch that really quick. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna be reacting to a video by, let's see, what's this guy's name? B-Mask, titled "Why Rayman 3 Was Matter." Now, in case you guys don't know, back in the the PlayStation days, from PlayStation to the first Xbox, OG Xbox, there was a game called Rayman, and he was like this little dog-looking creature dude with no limbs.
It's not that I don't think Rayman 2 is great. Maybe this is one of those you had to be there moments, but
The first one was I didn't get to play it, but I heard it was good for PlayStation at the time. I, however, managed to play Rayman 2 on the N64, and it was Ubisoft's Super Mario. You know, basically, it was Super Mario for Ubisoft, or Ubisoft Super Mario. Can't even talk right.
visually, this was one of the most groundbreaking things to come out of the 3D revolution brought about by Mario 64,
Oh, yeah.
saying, hey, why don't we paint those textures?
It was
Why
pretty
don't
cool,
we
dude.
conceptualize some of those amazing-looking characters with some of the best designs for
Hell
pirate
yeah,
enemies
dude.
you've seen in your life? And hey, while
the
we're at
coolest
it,
freaking thing.
let's have them act. The music, the style, the scale, visually and conceptually, Rayman 2
It was like top tier type of stuff at the time, dude. You kind of, like he said, you kind of have to be there, or you have to be there in order to understand. Oops.
is one of my favorites, but as a game and purely on a personal level, it's complicated. My issue is that
That for me, it wasn't complicated. I freaking love the game. Challenging at times, especially if you didn't have a memory card.
experience sort of stops at its look. It's a really interesting scenario with this amazing opening, and it's intriguing and funny and surprising, and then,
good-ass
after an
characters, dude.
encounter with the King of Nightmares
these
resulting
wacky-looking
in
dudes.
what I can only assume made someone very happy, it sort of never gets better. Ray 2's boggy swamp vibes wear a bit thin on me as it goes on, starts to feel like one really long level, and even with a couple neat gimmicks thrown in,
Okay, yeah, he's not that wrong. He's not wrong about that and whatnot, because let's go back a little bit. Let's see.
never gets better.
Okay, there's a point in the game where you meet this eyeball looking dude, and well, I played it on an emulator. Not gonna lie, I actually have played Rayman 2 on an emulator. I think it's in my I have gameplay in my channel, but I haven't gone around to finishing it yet. But it's like, I think at the time when I was younger, the level did feel very long and challenging, and it took maybe like 2 hours for me to probably finish some of the later levels as soon as you advance, like, say, probably like around this one, and it's like still kind of somewhat early on in the game.
Ray 2's boggy swamp vibes wear a bit thin on me as it goes on, starts to feel like one really long level, and even with a couple neat gimmicks thrown in, there's very little variation in tone, comedy, and drama to match the fantastic premise. The final boss is a complete fumble as far as I'm concerned. Sure, very atmospheric to fight the pirate leader at the top of the crow's nest, but what does he fight you in? A mech. What does it look like? A bug. What's it called? The Grolgoth. Maybe it's super meaningful if French. I am not. Je suis anglais. It's walked forward what could be done with games, but it kind of walked back what I loved about the original, which was, admittedly, the very first video game I ever saw, so this is very much a me
I didn't get to
problem.
play it, so
Rayman 1 might seem crude now, but it was really out there compared to what else was happening at the time. A very attractive 2D platformer that compensated in an era where everything was hopping to the next dimension by offering up its wild personality. A series of trippy events coloured by some engaging, tricky gameplay. It was very knowingly a lot of nonsense, and it reveled in it. Sure, the game starts like most platformers in the typical forest haven,
cool.
but then throws out all decorum by making World 2 a non-Euclidean musical instrument Daydream, where you fight a giant sax. Ray 2 was a funny game, but not like Ray 1. Not
yeah, actually, you know what it reminds me of? If you guys ever played the Sega Collection, I didn't know about it until my brother played it because he got the Sega Collection. Sega Collection because he's a huge Sonic fan. Yeah, there we go. A Sonic fan. He liked playing Sonic, and the reason why he got it was because he wanted to play the Sonic games. But then he also dove into some of the older games that they had there on the Sega Genesis, and it was part of like the 360. I think it had like 30 plus games on the disc if you bought it for like, you know, $19, which was probably, it wasn't that bad. And I remember that there was this one game called Ray Star. You play as like a star looking type of dude and whatnot, and the art style kind of reminds me of this in the first Rayman game.
And that was fine, because it meant it could continue to stand alone like as an example of what Rayman could represent. This wasn't about creating a brand or a franchise, this was about showing us what Michel Ancel could provide Ubisoft.
It's pretty cool.
But now we had two Rayman games serving two very different purposes, and I wasn't sure if I really wanted more of what Ray 2 was doing in perpetuity. Wouldn't it be great if we could take the strengths of both, something with the beauty of the second and the outright scope of mischief of the first? Wouldn't that be something? And you've all probably put together that it was something, and that I'm just doing a very lazy lead into what I'm going to talk about, which is Rayman 3.
The third game. Rayman 3. It was pretty good too.
Hit it, Johnny.
Yeah, it was pretty big around that time.
Well, that's okay.
Dang
we
it.
can just recreate the feel of the song pretty easily.
Wake up, drop my coffee on the floor. Knock, knock, oh no, police at the door.
Yeah.
Ray 3 is admittedly a completely different beast. It has a new mechanical focus, a new structure, and a very offbeat tone. But weirdly, it's also entirely in keeping with the values of both of the previous titles.
Yeah.
It's got the luscious environments and fantasy angles that were
It definitely has the same art style as it had in the previous games.
emphasized in the second, but retains the wackier humor and variation in pace and genre of the original, managing to blend the two experiences aesthetically and create what I feel is a game worthy of standing apart, adding value to all three. It's not perfect, not by...
I think also one thing that this game was kind of hindering was a little bit of that exploration factor and whatnot. Like, you can find hidden locations and whatnot, because there's these gems that you have to collect in order to get points and whatnot. And then when you get these points, once you cap them out, you get to unlock new, like, little mini game levels in the game itself and whatnot, which are pretty cool and whatnot. Some of them are challenging and stuff like that. But I wish there was like a little bit more reward to it and whatnot. Maybe he'll probably dive into it a bit.
By a long shot, but the vibe of what it's doing is unmatched, in ways that severely influenced my tastes all over again.
Yeah.
I don't know, once you've magically shrunk down and driven your shoe like a bumper car...
Yeah, it's got a bunch of wacky stuff.
That's sticking. Rayman 3's
so
madness
cool.
is almost immediately inherent in its new plot, with the helpful collectibles of the last game, the Lums, suddenly turning evil and stitching together sack-like outfits to become an entirely new kind of mafia-style bad guy, the Hoodlums. Yes, very good. I like that. Their leader, Andre, bent on world domination, what else, gets swallowed by Ray's pal Glowbox, leading to a quest to find a doctor to operate and get him out of there. Like Chase. Before Andre's minions do it the bad way, like House. The pace of the thing is much faster, the tone set pretty early on, when Rayman's hands are actually pulled right off his body, forcing him to slowly build back his skill set in a tutorial that begins with you already on the move. Is it complicated? No. But it's a pace thing, and it's nice, and I like that it's there. A lot of its ideas are a bit more aggressive, not just because...
Yeah, he's right. It does have a good pace to it and whatnot. I, however, wish that... This is my personal opinion, but I wish that the game was a little bit more longer. You could say. I honestly wish it was somewhat a bit longer.
Because of the new style of gameplay, but the real swings it makes for humor, always throwing something new and crazy at you. Andre sits inside Glowbox's belly and forces him to drink barrels of plum juice, clearly getting him drunk and providing at least one interesting gameplay set piece, and otherwise just letting him float off, which, when I was 10, funniest thing ever.
What's up down there? Can't you fly?
Now it's a little bit annoying
Rayman's
though.
power-ups can now be found inside these cans that create extensions of his existing abilities. The
Laser
favorite being
detergent.
one that turns his helicopter hair into an actual helicopter hat.
Yeah.
I think anyone who grew up with this will make a point of the psychedelic level transitions.
Yeah, that part of the game. As he was saying, it's the first 3 levels where you have to where you're taking Glowbox to all these 3 different doctors. You go through this. Let me see if I can get right about here. Yeah, you see all this crazy crap that's going on here. You go through this level in order to. It's like a portal traveling type of thing in order to get to the next level and whatnot. It's pretty cool, psychedelic and colorful and whatnot. That kind of throws you off because you kind of want to admire the surroundings and whatnot. And these little lines here that you have to ride them along on like this little skateboard.
This will make a point of the
like
psychedelic.
That, like how he's jumping on, how Rayman is jumping and doing all these little tricks to get onto the next little laser light thingamabob bridge, so to speak. And yeah, you often get distracted, but it's cool.
Turning these potentially frustrating skateboard sections into hugely engaging set pieces with smooth grooves. Daddy-o.
Daddy-o. Oh yeah. The music is definitely pretty dope, not gonna lie, when you go through the level and whatnot.
Potentially frustrating skateboard sections into hugely engaging set pieces with smooth grooves. Daddy-o.
Daddy-o, yeah. Oh yeah, disco, son.
Such insanity though, it's not as relentless as it could be. Certainly not in the incredibly varied soundtrack. There's something about the blend of moods it catches without ever losing what I think is the core feel of all the Rayman titles. Sometimes it's incredibly delicate, commenting on the fantasy landscape in a way that's inspired, and in some cases a little ambiguous, like you're not sure how deep the power being messed with goes.
Power beam. Observe.
Other times, it's more modern and casual, letting you know it's not to be taken all that seriously, especially concerning the more industrialized hoodlums. The clunker-junker sound of a bunch of mooks just putting this thing together and hoping it works.
I mean, I think it does, honestly. Oh, damn. Nice.
But all tracks have a sense of magic, an idea that whether the past or the future, it's all filtered through the light-hearted fun of Rayman's world, and giving it a grittier attitude that, honestly, slaps.
It's got some pretty good boss fights, too. Yeah, the music definitely slaps, too. It's totally something different.
Ever searched Best VGM and this is on there? Because it's always on there. I actually quite like the way all the characters come across in this. For sure, very few are integral, but it's the first Rayman game where it's kind of accepted most everyone has already been introduced. The intro level cycling through a number of familiar faces, all reacting to the situation as it happens. Nobody having to sit down and give a formal handshake introduction would only slow everything down. It sells the established world he's already been a part of that he has to save. The collective cry for Rayman to get things back to being chill, not unlike that single thumbs up from the original. Glowbox I also prefer being this way. Personally speaking, I think it's too easy to look at him and go, oh well yeah, he's going to be the big deep voice dumb guy with the heart of gold. But Glowbox in Ray 3 is a bit more of a naive child, convinced of his own assumptions, and someone who really needs saving this time around.
Sesame! I did it! I knew it would work! I did it!
I don't think the character design is as iconic as the stuff we saw in the second, but the choices are no less inspired, also bridging the gap back to the original. The Robo-Pirates were a classic trope given a modern touch, and the new villains take the modern idea of a mafia group and dress them in a style much more suited to Rayman's fantasy. In fact, they were directly inspired by the original main villain, Mr. Dark, and unlike the pirates who were pretty menacing, they're a bunch of bumbling goofs. The hoodlums work as a collective presence, and with the kind of bad guy design I love, taking the visual language of one species and scaling it up and down 100 different ways. I actually think this is to the other game's benefits. It makes Rayman 1 feel like a relevant part of the history again, itself featuring quite a charismatic bunch of silly bad guys who'd react to your actions, and lets Rayman 2 stand alone as the genuinely menacing presence they were, with a boss who probably would have sorted this out. And you know, a lot of other things get their due. Cages are here again, but with the little symbol wheel that always felt more satisfying than a simple number tally. Plums return with little Rayman 1 drawings, the jumping fish are back, and nothing beats the
the piranhas. There's like certain levels where the piranhas just like are kind of blocking your path because they're jumping back and forth over the bridge, chomping, hoping to get a bite of you.
Sense of dread I felt when a certain Rayman 2 enemy showed up without warning.
Damn,
I was 10.
They're not that bad.
You can't do this.
They're not
There
that
is, of
bad.
course, an entire level you can
I wasn't
unlock
that
that's a
scared.
reference to the original game directly as well. So
Yeah, that's one of the
make
bonus
that
levels.
What you will. Hell, even a classic move from that original game
la
becomes,
la.
in quite a wonderful twist, an integral plot mechanic by the game's end. Ray 3 manages to take a lot of the first two games' ideas and blend them in a way that for me felt pretty definitive, allowing itself the opportunity
cool.
to have fun and be funny, but also keep the more grandiose aspects of the second game
Whoa.
intact. All the Raymans have an intense level at some point in their runtime, not just in terms of challenge, but also in their look. Either the foreboding Cave of Scops in the original,
Purple
eventually
ones.
leading to an encounter with the largest boss in the game,
Dang.
or the Cave of Bad Dreams in Rayman 2, fighting against the King of Nightmares Jarno as we experience the world in the most Francos way possible.
Yeah.
Rayman 3 carries on the tradition, but
was
actually
different.
builds to it in a way that's a little subversive. After traipsing through the dark swamps, allusions are made to Glowbox and Rayman traveling to a place known as the Land of the Livid Dead. Name like that, you think, ooh, it's going to be a spooky, scary level like the other games.
Not really. It's not.
Ah, the land of the living dead at last. In any case, it's nice and calm here. And here I was expecting a scary place filled with terrified ghouls.
Yeah, god damn it. I hit the
Land of the
commentary
Living
on
Dead
itself.
turns out to be the game's palate cleanser, a hauntingly peaceful vista where the spirits you meet seem at peace, and the soundtrack suggesting there is more right with Rayman's world than there is wrong. It massively variates the game's pace in a way I've only ever heard spoken of positively. Chances are, when people think about what they like in this game, this section is the kind of thing they think of. However, upon reaching the gate for the next world, the fellas are dropped off in the Desert of the Canaran,
Oh, yeah.
and it's hell.
This bird!
Yeah, it sucks.
Get in the
It's a
shade!
desert.
Spooky skulls, red skies, and then the cavernous bowels of the mountains, revealing
The
Rayman's
Canaran.
most intense enemies yet.
Spit in his eye. Skin him. Make him write bad checks.
The Canaran can't be fought, they can only be outrun, and Rayman's first encounter with them forces him into their space to try and think of a way out. No time to try anything else. The bait and switch really stuck with me, but also made me feel the variety of tones and environments in Rayman 3 that I didn't with the previous game. It's not quite as off the wall as the genre choices in 1, but it is as well paced, making what is a fairly short journey feel much more distinct with each passing location. Of course, this is just the surrounding meat. The actual bones of the game all resting on a very different kind of platformer, with a very different focus than before.
Combat fatigue. That's exactly what we need.
Rather than a strict platformer gauntlet or a free-romping collectathon, this game's a beatdown. A combat-heavy experience where Rayman uses his flying fists to take on dozens of enemies and score points based on his performance.
Yeah.
Not entirely what any of us expected, but not an unwelcome change either. Not that there's a precedent for
pretty cool.
franchises doing this, which proves it works. Very much the opposite.
Oh.
Crash and Spyro both pivoted to combat in the cheaper early Activision years, and in both cases essentially fell into every possible trap. Both were horribly padded to essentially make up for the fact that their combat systems weren't particularly strong. Titans resorted to a star system that would
Right.
slowly reset itself, which made certain encounters feel particularly broken, and Spyro giving you 1,000 moves and mandatory tutorial sections that made up a good 30% of the game's time, rendered
Wow.
useless by the fact that you don't really need them all that much anyway. No amount of Gary Oldman can fix that. Rayman's much more straightforward.
Yeah.
The combat's fun.
I found that out like a couple of years back that Gary Oldman played Spyro's mentor, Ignitus? I forgot what his name was.
Fast and frantic, able to lock onto your opponents and take out most enemies in just a few well-timed hits. Never mashing buttons needlessly, but always to a very specific rhythm once you're engaged with an opponent. You can push back or get up close, and the various upgrade suits offer their own combat abilities. My favourite being the swing ability turning into a long-range electric clamp. Didn't know he was into that. Enemy
Yeah.
variety means you're never bored
Yeah, it's pretty
either.
cool.
Sure, you're facing soldiers and bombers for the most part, but when the magic wizard shows up with his banger theme song, things really step up a gear. Enemy encounters never feel like boring waves of endless hordes until the next area opens up. They're little puzzles of their own, always bringing a sense of variety and always just enough to
In
feel
order to get to
manageable,
the next
or in
level.
some cases turning what you think you can do on its head. This absolutely carries over to the bosses, maybe my favourite set of bosses in a game like this. No two encounters are the same, varying not only in method, but in scale. You face a giant pair of legs attempting to squash you, then you kill the guy driving them and take
And they
complete
use it.
control with running commentary.
Oh, Rayman is
Super cool.
unstoppable today, folks. He's a real steamroller.
You meet a witch and get tangled up in a game of magic tennis over a cauldron, turning
Yeah.
either you or her into a frog and giving chase until someone lands a hit. Hell, at one point, Rayman is challenged by a massive Canaran warrior to a one-on-one arena duel,
Reflex.
spinning around imbued with ancient power as the soundtrack blares
the
out what
ballerina
sounds like the
dancer.
end of the goddamn world.
Whoa! was a
You
pretty
have
good
angered
battle.
the gods, Rayman.
And yet, even with all of those, there's still one guy who stands out from the others.
Ah, yeah.
Unlucky and unwise is he who risks entering my domain.
The hunter dude.
Razov is still unlike any boss I've experienced in a platformer. A cat and mouse chase through the mansion of a pompous hunter who can strike without warning, either from the safety of his office or in person, chased on foot once the tables turn. It's a real character-driven event, and the kind of thinking outside the box material I always want 3D platformers to catch up with. Creating experiences where you're working through the mechanics of the characters, but having their encounters match the personalities. In ways you can't do by plopping them in an arena and coming up with avoidable attacks. Almost kind of emphasized by when they do exactly that kind of thing for a second phase. Bit of a letdown, kind of works though. There's a lot of dynamics present in Ray 3 beyond the combat, big and small, presenting what is a vibrant and often surprising world of opportunities, some as bonkers as you might expect, but others actually rather awe-inspiring. Traveling through the magical ruins of a tower, only to end up bringing that tower back from the dead and traveling through what it used to be, filled with lots of little areas and stairwells you'll be heading through in a couple of interesting ways.
I mean, I gotta say that, like, yeah, there's a lot of positives on the span of these games. Of course, they're not going to be perfect and whatnot, but they're definitely bangers, man. I ain't gonna lie, they're definitely bangers. And if you ever get a chance to play them, I highly recommend them. I'm pretty sure, yeah, Rayman 3, well, I think it's the only one that you can probably play. However, the second Rayman, or the first one, you probably have to look for emulators or stuff like that. However, I've heard from the grapevine that they're in development of a new one. But whether if that's going to be like a remake of the first one, or do a trilogy, right? Just straight out remaster 3 of them, which would be cool. I wouldn't knock it. I'd be welcome to it. But yeah, I mean, for quite a while we haven't had a solid 3D platformer Rayman game. It's definitely been a while.
Razov has captured these little mole fairy things, which are all chained up around his house, that if you punch their locks, they'll thank you for being freed and leave behind some health. The hoodlums can be seen at various points goofing off on the job, sometimes without you even realizing. Their equipment always laid out diegetically, so you can understand how they actually use the area. Perhaps a defining moment for me was starting this level, looking off in the distance at this enormous robotic creature slowly making its way into the ocean, framed against the darkened sky. A short swim later and the creature suddenly dives in front of me, as if it had been waiting all along. Powerful in-camera plotting like this, which made me feel I wasn't just playing a scripted video game. Sometimes as a kid, just standing there and watching this thing take its time to disappear. Even the point system isn't just driven by how well you do in a fight or how many collectibles you get. Hunting down 2 little creatures in specific ways gives you little bonuses of their own too, hidden in their own crevices. Perhaps, in hunting them, you'll come across other secret rooms, some of them hiding some lovely Easter eggs that blew my mind as a kid. This has to be what that octopus felt like. You know, the one who kept hiding things in Mr. Potato Head and he got excited when he dug them out again. It's a life well lived, I tell you. There's thought behind this fairly tight experience, and that actually extends to the story. I mean, while nothing deep, it's still got more going on than I think I would expect from a Rayman game. The stakes shifting as things approach the end. There's not exactly a plot.
I mean, yeah, it's not as deep as probably, I want to say, as a second game, which was honestly very deep, a lot deeper. The third one was probably just a little bit more lighthearted. Nothing wrong with that, but I kind of wish they embellished it a little bit or something like that. You know, just for I guess to keep the engagement a little bit more, you know, keep engagement or something like that, you know.
In the other Rayman
you
games,
understand what I mean.
Ray 2 has new ideas and characters it throws in, but nothing you won't see coming a mile off. But Ray 3 is so far the only Rayman game that weaves between characters, connecting dots in a way I kind of wish 2 did more of. The fight with Reflux would, in the other 2, just be another cool stop on the journey. But what I wasn't expecting was for Andre to keep it in his back pocket to establish a new master plan. One I think might be worth seeing for yourself, given I'm spoiling just about everything else from this 20-year-old game. But I will play this clip.
Yes, Andy! Yes, Andy! Can't you say anything else?
No, Andy.
There's a lot, and it moves fast, but it does feed into some of its faults, in what is clearly not as huge a leap in technical quality as 2 was to 1. There's dodgy camera angles, a slightly stiff sense of movement, and a feeling that a lot of it was still being finalized right up until launch in a hastier way than they would have liked. And these are things I don't feel are true about the other 2. I actually wonder if this is why aspects of the HD version are kind of broken. Really, it wasn't okay for so many remasters to be passed off with completely messed up textures like this. I don't know why we kept letting that happen. At the expense of being faster and...
Yeah, I definitely have found similar issues where some of the like textures or color schemes just kind of like disappear or just look all wonky and fucked up. And you're like, oh, what the heck happened? You think that they would probably like, fix it or whatever.
And more frantic, you're losing that more immersive, slower paced sense of wonder the second game offered. And if you miss points on a specific level, you're forced to go through all of them within a world again to get your rewards. It's almost an arcade style beat 'em up. It's a smaller game, taking only a handful of hours to complete in total, which works for its clear intentions on replay value, but leaves you...
I'd say it's probably like a good 5-6 hours.
You a little wanting for something with so much character. Of course, on that front, I think your mileage will absolutely vary. The thing about Rayman 2 that I'm not keen on is how, even though the drawings are bursting with character, the actual characters are pretty stock. There's nothing inherently interesting for me in the storytelling that makes me go, oh, the person making this is something...
Yeah, they're a little bit one-dimensional in a way.
Something interesting to say. Not that they aren't endearing, they're just missing some of the nuances I like about other platformer casts. Not necessarily in games with lots of dialogue either. However, I think it's that same quality which makes it more universally appealing, and it's to its benefit. Rayman 2, if we're going to try and dismiss my feelings for a moment, is incredibly wise to not try and impose too much on the player. It's not that kind of game. It's very much about soaking in that look and its extremely broad characters, with a couple of curveballs thrown in to give it flavour, and let you derive meaning in between. I do think all the teensies wanting to be king is genius. They certainly don't take it anywhere, but it's not what you'll remember when you put it down. It lets the player project much more of their own thoughts onto the game, and if YouTube comments are anything to go by, people are very good at justifying pretty much whatever they want to defend. So Rayman 3 unfortunately shoots itself in the foot by being so specific, and I think it's probably worse in the English dub. Rayman is, ultimately, a French character, and I think that's very important to remember whenever you approach any dialogue or story beat in these games as an English speaker. This is a very different sensibility, and I imagine in French there are certain things that are way funnier than they are in English, which has the then ropey job of having to translate everything to not only make sense and match it to the timing of the existing animations, but to try and interpret what it believes will be funny. And I'll be honest, I think they might have done some of this game a little bit dirty.
Little grasshopper, one must never let the Canarins get near you, capiche?
If you loved the mysterious nature of the second or the whimsical feel of the first, you're not going to enjoy Glowbox making movie references when you punch him in the tummy.
You've seen too many Gladiator flicks!
You're not going to like the back and forth between the now more abrasive Billy West version of Murphy and the development team being delivered in tiny text boxes you can barely read.
I was told that after Rayman 2 I'd be cast as a tormented artist who falls for a girl with great big eyes.
You will probably cringe into your socks if you live in any time post-2020 and see this.
Oh, yeah, right. Since we're all PC.
It's that which makes it feel a little out of step with the other two, and I've had it suggested to me...
I mean, I'm going to be honest, I'm not too keen about like PC stuff or whatever, but I can understand how some stuff, doesn't age very well. So that's, valid and whatnot, but, I guess to each of their own, but I don't think it's that much of a big deal. It could have been far worse.
Eons ago, it actually feels like more of a sequel to another earlier Ubisoft game by Michel Ancel known as Tonic Trouble. Tonic has an even more absurdist plot. An alien accidentally dropping a can of crazy goo on Earth, transforming everything in its path into some kind of nonsense creature, and a drunk biker into a Viking god who creates killer vegetables. It's that kind of game. There was only one reason Tonic was so absurd though. It was mostly a tech demo. This wasn't entirely intended to be a serious project of its own. The wild creativity on display,
kind of has that same feel to it to the Rayman games.
Was largely the result of Tonic's effort to create a 3D platformer after Mario 64, with an aim to eventually turn that into a Rayman project. Not too concerned with if the game did particularly well as a brand, and why that game plays pretty badly in comparison. Rayman 3 certainly feels like a do-over, not just because of its crazy nature, but perhaps because of the literal cans you can activate that offer wild powers, which feels like a nice way to return the favor. For all that, I understand why Rayman 3 turns off a lot of Ray purists, but I accept so much of that is down to localization, which I don't feel delivered a very polished job. I was always irritated that Glowbox doesn't even have the same voice in the pre-rendered cutscenes as the main game, especially when I much preferred the voice they went with in the gameplay.
Yeah, that's right. Some of the characters' voices are like a bit off and whatnot.
To the doctors! Rayman, I need medical attention.
Yeah. his voice in game compared to the cinematics is changed. It's like off and whatnot, and I agree with him. I think the voice in the cinematics is better. Should have gone with
it's
that
all
one.
a little too subjective to cross barriers the way the second did, and I think that gives it an appropriate standing amongst the audience, having plenty of fans, but dividing those who felt that the second one was the peak of the series.
Yeah, I can agree with
You
that.
little prima dog, you should be ashamed!
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
In a way, that's what I like about it. Rayman 3 forces the player into a corner, presenting them with a view of the series that's a little more complicated than the simple, peaceful world of the second, and gets much more specific. Sure, perhaps its choices are a little more crass, less palatable for the wider audience, but as someone whose first experience was the original, this was a little closer to what I loved about that, and for all its flaws, left a much greater impact. If there is some objective god out there who punishes opinions that aren't correct, then I imagine Rayman 2 is his test of mortal
miss playing the
strength.
second
But
one,
until
man.
I meet him, Ray 3 pushes more of my personal buttons, and that's unlikely to change. Perhaps my feeling on where the game's chaotic heart lies is the impression given by its ending, where we discover how Andre even came to be. The reason isn't some evil plot or freak of nature. It's a very deliberate act performed by something we're not even sure is alive, or thinks with its own brain, and that kinda puts a hilariously upsetting spin on things, in a way that forces the game to come full circle as you'll immediately play it all over again. 'Cause you kinda have to. It wasn't a bad guy who started this, it wasn't all the wild people you met who didn't seem to know which end was up. It was you. You did this.
Yeah. Ooh.
And you'd do it again.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Wake up!
Oh, man.
I've never been too worried about what people think of the game in the long run, but there was one person who made a comment about not being on board with Rayman 3 that did pique my attention.
Okay.
Original creator and legendary game developer Michel Ancel, the
Oh,
father,
right.
essentially, of Rayman himself, and the director of his first two titles. Michel Ancel was busy at the time of Ray 3's development on Beyond Good and Evil.
Oh, yeah,
often
that's right.
considered
Oh,
a
man, that's a
groundbreaking
freaking
of
game we're never going to get to freaking play. We're never going to get to play another freaking... That game is like in developmental hell or whatever. I think at this point it's probably scrubbed for all I know.
Much more in keeping with the whimsical tone of what he was achieving in Ray 2, only from a more
It's freaking
adult
classic,
angle,
man.
concerned with then contemporary
game.
culture and broad political commentary. Again, just much easier for people to grasp.
Hate being old.
When asked about Rayman 3, he said he appreciated the work, but it wasn't quite to his taste, having only consulted on the title and feeling it was a little concrete, as well as too much emphasis on the voices rather than letting the humour come from the visuals.
Right.
As you've already heard, I don't think he's entirely wrong about that. But the word concrete has stuck with me. At first I found this strange, given he made Beyond Good and Evil, which in itself has a more concrete feel. But over the years I've come to appreciate what it might have meant in translation. The game's subject heavier, but still carrying the same optimistic charm underneath. And really, there's no other game doing everything it's trying to accomplish. Not together, anyway. It's like The Matrix meets Zelda meets Pokemon Snap. Underneath the grit,
Yeah,
it's
I
an
guess that's probably
upbeat,
a good
fantastical view of reality,
way
and
to
I get
depict it.
why those sensibilities would clash with what he felt Rayman 3 was doing. However, I do challenge the assertion purely on the basis of him never quite knowing what to do with Rayman next, and on some occasions, leaning right into 3's take.
Oh, the rabbits. It wasn't
Originally, he
my...
was going to direct Rayman 4 that was sort of a free-roaming, large-scale adventure where Rayman was thrust into another random wacky world, fighting, of all things, rabbits. Rabbits that came from inside the Earth, complete with death lasers and robots and all sorts.
Yeah.
Look nuts. He had all these different costumes, he traveled on the backs of giant animals, he fought a Star Wars reference, maybe even teamed up with Andre. It was very confusing. This was clearly designed to experiment with the then exciting new Wii console.
I never got to play it because I never had the Wii. I only had Xbox and PS2. The GameCube, I only got to play that because I had one of my best friends had one, but I didn't get to play it as much as much as people did during the time, because around that time Xbox was pretty much Xbox and PlayStation were pretty much the consoles to have, I think, but Xbox being number one in my opinion because of Halo.
Console. Nintendo's attempt to shake up the market with motion controllers that would supposedly mimic your real-life moves on the screen, and the trailer they released, really went all the way with that. But, fast forward a few years, and suddenly everything had changed. The huge adventure was gone, the animal riding buddies either repurposed or I believe probably squirreled away as part of another pitch he had in mind, and the rabbits had also become a little, different. Suddenly, the project was transformed into lowercase Rayman, uppercase Raving Rabbids.
Lowercase.
And it was obvious to all that, while this was a Rayman game, the Rabbids were the star of the show.
Yeah,
it was
they
now
were.
a series of minigames. The Rayman aspect just a small part of the project, while the Rabbids dominated all forms of interest within those short bursts of play, all focusing on actions you could pull off with the Wii Remote. And when the game was ported to the PC and other consoles, it became blindingly apparent that, without those waggle controls, there was just no sense of challenge at all.
Yeah.
I actually like the sections in between where you can
Yeah, that's like some of the problems with when some of the older Nintendo consoles, like from the Wii, because you needed a Wiimote in order to play that game to, have that experience.
see Rayman's reputation improving as he wins more minigames, but with very little substance beyond that, as well as an incredibly mean-spirited ending, I can't help but feel the
Frogs?
whole experience comes off as a little pointless. Continuing with a much ranker sense of humour and a fairly off-putting, grungy look, you have to wonder what it was Ansel was really correcting. The GBA game that came out at the time certainly didn't follow suit with its use of Rayman 2 and
Yeah,
Morton's
wait a
characters. They even got a Dark Toon in there. Quick, somebody free him.
Ooh.
Rayman was suddenly muscled out of future Rabid titles as they
Yeah.
dominated the new series,
He ceased
including
to
an
exist in a
admittedly
way.
pretty funny game about trying to get rid of them. There was some awareness there, at least. And hey, maybe they were just making room for the minions. I'm not unconvinced that if
wouldn't
they
be
wanted to
surprised.
drum up a lawsuit, they won't. But it's close. It's close.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Goodwill
They've got
was
this
restored somewhat with
Origins.
Rayman Origins, a 2011 platformer that was clearly an effort to go back to the roots of the series as a 2D gauntlet platformer, much like the original, and invoking a lot of the first game's specific imagery in a new, super funny style that went a long way to erasing the aftertaste of the Rabid stuff. It has to be said, the gameplay is pretty fantastic, an excellent return to what Rayman began life as, and
never got
offering
to-
something I think gave Nintendo a run for
I never got a chance to play it and whatnot. Probably should though.
its money. I don't think you need me to go on about it the way literally everyone else did, with the same being true of the sequel too. However, again, I wonder what of Rayman 3 wasn't of use here. The sense of humor and style is much closer to what Ray 3 did, a slightly edgier tone with a couple of direct lifts from what it established. And I also wonder if Ansel really had that much of a vision for Rayman over
Nice.
wanting to mess about with the new UbiArt technology.
I mean, the
you look at
art
the
style's
original
pretty
plans
good.
for Rayman 4 Post Rabbids, again attempting to go back to the original, and the extremely long process for
It's almost as close to some of the other platformers that we have, like example, like Ori, but Ori is a little bit more 3D-ish and whatnot, but the style looks just about there, or mechanics,
Origins to emerge from that, even at one point advertised to the public as an episodic series explaining Rayman's early days, and with a couple of cool plot points that got completely walked back, which feel, I don't know, a bit sloppily paved over, knowing their original intentions.
Okay.
Perhaps this is to its benefit, to keep it as a standalone title, and personally, I think it's good for Rayman to be driven by technology, rather than being bound to any kind of canon or logic. But I also think the slapdash approach ends up muddying a couple of its own contained ideas.
Don't go there.
How many of you thought this was Mr. Dark in disguise, and not just the magician turning bad? Because I have to tell you, officially, it's the latter. For my money, the
Okay.
Origins approach actually
It
loses
does
more of
look
what I
less
like
dark.
about 2 than 3 does, and the sequel
It
they
does look
created
like it.
not doing much with it either, even if it was an equally
OG.
strong experience. There's just too many things that I feel now you might look back on and go, I don't know if I prefer that. Don't know if I would have done it that way. Yes, even if they're
Fish people.
perhaps this is
Fish
part of why it
people.
essentially faded away, outside of a
Mermaid?
mobile spin-off which actually had an official design for Mr. Dark. That's dope, what the fuck? And while Rayman
okay.
keeps popping up in surprisingly weird ways, there's still a tension around the
Okay, I didn't know he was gonna freaking touch upon that. But in case you guys didn't know, on Netflix there's a Ubisoft show. I don't know if they created it, but it was a show with Ubisoft characters. So you got Rayman definitely in there. You have Sam Fisher. I believe the show was called Captain Laser Hawkeye or Laser Eye Hawk, or I don't know. So, it's something like that. Captain Laser Hawk or something like that. Okay, and it has Rayman in there and whatnot. And we basically, well, let's just say the show is very adult. Okay, let's just say that.
the feelings for what might have been.
I
I mention all of this because I don't think Ansel had the right approach in doing Rayman 3 down the way he did publicly. And maybe he feels different now. Maybe that wasn't even what he meant, given that he did consult on that game. He himself has departed the industry for reasons that aren't super apparent, even if we can hazard a couple of guesses, and left a slew of
Never gonna
incomplete
get this
projects
game,
behind.
Never gonna get that game.
Which is really the point. Whether he was facing opposition or not, I have always found Ansel's ambitions both his strength and his weakness. Projects rapidly cycling through different forms on a constant basis and often not quite sure of what they really are, unable to meet the targets he'd set, or clearly becoming distracted by new technological breakthroughs. It's what I want from an artist. I want that kind of hunger and need to aim high. There are no games like On Cells, many of them changing things for the better, and inspiring other great artists in the business.
Yeah.
But I don't think that makes it terribly fair to diminish Rayman 3's effort when tasked with picking up the ball, which, now knowing where else it could have gone, isn't a bad job at all. Especially the fact that it, unlike so many other Rayman sequels, actually exists. Being so terribly niche means it's going to have its extremely subjective fans, and I am clearly one of them. It's not the best of the Raymans on a cosmic level, I'll admit that, and it's not got the cleanest bill of health on multiple fronts, but it spoke to me as a weird little journey through a world right out of an animated 90s VHS adventure, and was, in my...
Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. For me, the game was like a different type of fantasy compared to, like, you know, the Marios or Crash Bandicoot. They're kind of like in that same category, but for me, Rayman holds something a little bit more, I don't know, something more king to it and whatnot. And, you know, I think this is my opinion. If maybe Rayman had followed maybe a similar formula like with like Mario, it might have done a little bit more better, or might have been in the medium a lot more, I guess you could say. It could have gotten to places if maybe they had followed that same formula that Mario has and whatnot. Because he forgot to mention, or I'm pretty sure he probably talked about them for a little bit and whatnot. But there was definitely different games. Like there was it was on the PlayStation 2 that they had what was called Rayman Arena, and it sounds just like what it sounds. It's an arena game. It was, well, first and foremost, it was like it was more of a racing game, but it definitely had like arena fighting style type combat as well. So it was like kind of like a multiplayer type of game for your friends to play, you know. So in a way, it did kind of follow the Mario like formula and whatnot in a way, but I don't think it got as much as attention as it did, because only like I had, like, for my friends, only like maybe two of my besties knew about Rayman.
My book, B-Coded, Purple as Hell. It made me think differently about how a game can feel as a structure, how something can find even more meaning from a property even after new interpretations. It was something fresh for the time, exciting, a Rayman for the 2000s, and it was, more than anything, madder.
Yeah. Matter. It's the title of the song. Woo! Man, that was a good video.
See you in Rayman 4.
Oh, don't even. Ah, man. No, don't even joke about that, man, because we're probably never gonna get one. But I'm hoping we do, because, like I said earlier on, in the rumor is that they're in development of a new one. But in development, you know, they can go crazy. They can go they'll either make like a remake or a complete trilogy, or they even just might make a straight up sequel, you know. But yeah, that was a hell of a good video. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was a good thing. It was a good thing to react to. I enjoyed that. But anyway, guys, I will catch you. I want to end it here and catch you in the next one. And for YouTube, I'm gonna leave the original video in the description, so you guys go check out Mr. B Mask right there. Go show him some love. Made a fantastic video, so shout out to him. Good stuff, man. Good stuff. All right, guys, it's gonna be it. Catch you all later.